My name is Jaime Parsons. I'm the Principal Advisor Urban Design here at the City of Hobart, and it is my absolute pleasure having all of these great placemakers, city shapers, and just people interested in seeing where we can go into the future. So for the night, we have the immense privilege of having Ethan Kent, co-founder of Placemaking X and Executive Director. And he will be our guest speaker. But after that, we will have hopefully a very interactive and thought-provoking panel discussion, which will open to all of you to be able to interact and just share thoughts. And then once all of the formal proceedings are over, which by the way, we are recording, so we can then use them and share them with other people who couldn't make it tonight. After that, it's just the opportunity to interact, network, and have a great time. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the Deputy Lord Mayor, Helen Burnet. Helen was first elected to Hobart City Council in March 2005. She was recently re-elected as Deputy Lord Mayor, having served in that role from 2009 to 2011 and 2018 to 2022. She has a background in health, having worked as a podiatrist and then a podiatric manager in the Tasmanian Health Services from 1994 to 2017. Councillor Burnet is a member of the Council's Risk and Audit Panel. She chairs the Future Hobart portfolio and co-chairs the Healthy Hobart portfolio, all very relevant to this night. Helen is the chairperson of the Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority. She has served on various council-related committees, including Access Advisory Committee, Waste Strategy South, Cycle South, and the Hobart Bicycle Advisory Committee. Helen advocates for issues of social justice, health and well-being, and the environment. Councillor Burnet is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Her interests include walking, travel, and art. And she's married and has 2 adult sons. And please welcome her to the stage. It's a very comprehensive, very delightful bio.
Thank you, Jaime, and thank you to Simple Cider. It's so nice to be back here, not on a comedy night, but we might journey into comedy later on. I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Muwinina people, whose traditions and customs were the centrepiece and so important for the culture of this place before white settlement in 1804, and pay respects to the ongoing custodians, the Palua Pakana people of Tasmania. I'd also like to, I can see through the glare, Councillor Mike Dutta. Welcome, Mike. It's great to have you here. And I know that various other councillors and aldermen were taking part in the Main Street Conference, and I hope that those who have attended have had a fantastic time. So Jaime touched on the fact that I'm chair of the City of Hobart's Future Hobart Portfolio Committee. I just went for the name. I thought it was fantastic. So I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like a committee for me. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for the Future Hobart Making Better Places Together public forum. And we're going to hear some great panel discussion and from Ethan soon. So this is a great way to end informally a week which I hope has really fostered a lot of interest and discussion through the Main Street Conference. And I just hope that you all got so much out of it for those of you who could attend. And the City of Hobart was really pleased to sponsor the conference, and we had a good opportunity to broaden the conversation around how we can all contribute to engaging and thinking and engaging. We can contribute to engaging and thriving main streets and public spaces in our city and beyond. Streets are the lifeblood of our communities. They're really important places of social and cultural activity and where economic exchange can happen with local businesses. I mean, that sounds pretty dry, but that's essentially what they are. They're places, they're locations in their own right. And when you think about the main streets in our CBD, you think of Collins Street, parts of Elizabeth Street and Liverpool Street. But similarly, in our other suburbs, we've got great main streets and hubs where people like to gather. So you wouldn't think about Sandy Bay without thinking of Sandy Bay Road and the shopping precinct there. North Hobart with its amazing restaurants and all of those things that are important for me as a local in North Hobart are there, or almost there. I'd still like to have a community grocer there, but that's another story. And also, you know, South Hobart, where Mike had his shop, and that part of Macquarie Street is a really good focal point as well. And of course, in Lena Valley with Augusta Road and some of the improvements that we've done have really made this much more of a hub for people to gather. So these local main streets are the places where people want to congregate, to shop, to eat out, to go to the movies, and they are in a lot of ways destinations. By focusing on the place function of public spaces for our communities, it becomes clear that we all have a role and responsibility about how we improve, reimagine, repurpose our spaces. And one way of achieving that is through placemaking. So placemaking has been emerging as a means to empower local communities and businesses to be active participants in the shaping of more prosperous, resilient and welcoming places across the world. And such as the recognition of the inherent value of places that, I mean, there are many examples, but recently Alderman Bloomfield and I, with some staff, went up to Brisbane and we had a great tour around some of the green streets which cross Brisbane, but also Fish Lane, which was a combination with Brisbane City Council as well as the developer ARIA, which so it's a local Brisbane developer and they transformed the once functional, utilitarian and fairly unengaging Fish Lane into one of the most sought after addresses for residents and businesses alike. And it's really vibrant. It was a really good space and obviously really close to the cultural precinct as well. So this is really a timely conversation considering that Hobart's once own placemaking journey since Jan Gill and Associates came and did Hobart 2010 Public Spaces and Public Life report, which set us on a path of actively transforming our city into a place for people. So this is, as I said, manifest in the retail precinct upgrades that we've talked about, and also as part of the Central Hobart Plan that emphasises the role of key street corridors like Collins Street and Elizabeth Street in achieving the vision of a livable and flourishing capital city. And how the future urban design guidelines and the Elizabeth Street Vision Plan will seek to ensure our main streets are great places for all. And we discussed this last night with Ethan as a visitor to a special workshop at council, and it was so good just to sit down with him with his generosity of information and ideas and just have that conversation. And it's all about those conversations. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Ethan speak now and, of course, the panel. So, and really pleased that you could all come along. So please support Simple Cider and have a great night. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll introduce now Ethan Kent, and his bio demonstrates just how great it is to have him here and the level of his experience, but also how he's connected around the world. So Ethan Kent works to support public space organisations, projects and leadership around the world to build a global placemaking movement. Ethan has travelled to more than 1,000 cities. I don't think I'll ever get even close to that. In 60 countries to advance the cause of leading urban development with inclusive public spaces and placemaking. In 2019, he co-founded Placemaking X to network, amplify and accelerate placemaking leadership and impact globally. Ethan has helped initiate and grow 18 plus regional placemaking networks covering much of the globe. His current focuses include the Placemaking US Network and the Resource Centre for Social Life. So he has more than 20 years working in placemaking and started off at Project for Public Spaces. For those that don't know, this New York organisation is considered basically the founder of modern placemaking. Starting in the late 90s, Ethan has been integral to the development of placemaking as a transformative approach to economic development, environmentalism, transportation, governance, resilience, social equity, design, digital space, inclusion, tourism and innovation. And Ethan has keynoted well over 100 top urbanist conferences and helped organise dozens of placemaking conferences that have shaped the movement.
This has really been a wonderful week for me, a sort of a dream. I've actually gotten to work all over Australia. I've been to Australia about 20 times. I've never been able to work here and learn from what you all are doing and heard for a long time about it. Right before the pandemic, I actually did come here on vacation with my family. And walked Elizabeth Street and sort of got a sneak peek of how special it is. But this week has really allowed me to get to learn from the city staff and councillors that have been working so hard to make the city great. But clearly it's the people and the people behind many of these businesses and spaces that are extraordinary. And you can see that as you get closer, but there's also clearly a lot of potential to draw that out further, and how place and placemaking is an opportunity to connect that further. I could run. So we're seeing many causes and disciplines and movements coming to place as a means to more systematically and systemically address their goals. And so whether you're passionate about local food, which by the way, that was some of the best local food I've ever had, and the food is much richer here than anywhere I can think of. If you're passionate about health, environmentalism, equity, culture, and art, we're seeing how a focus on place can draw out the best in that effort, but bring in new partners and start to create the systems that make that sustainable, that make, for instance, art and artists sustainable. So you're known for your art, and you're known for a great art museum and so forth. But ultimately, the best cities draw out the creativity in everybody, and create an economy and a culture that makes art and artists sustainable, and not just people consuming art, but everyone feels like an artist in a sense. And so we're talking about how a lot of the Australian cities we worked in are looking at how placemaking can reinvent in government. So every department's job is to create place and place value, and how that creates broader collaboration across government. But then it also moves government from being just a deliverer of place to a enabler and a facilitator of great places. So, but the limiting factor for good places in all over the world is the silos of different causes and different disciplines and solutions. Even if well-intended, even the progressive wings of many of the sort of silos we all find ourselves in often can limit the demand for that solution or that idea. And so traffic is one example that dominates many of your streets and limits many cities. If you plan for cars and traffic, you get more cars and traffic. And so Hobart is more of a city right now to drive through than to. But it's also your biggest opportunity, how public spaces can become spaces that people feel comfortable in, that draw out the creativity and energy of the businesses, of the people and the life and the children of the city. So we led a campaign in New York that led to the closing of many parts of Broadway that's still evolving. And your street here is sort of like your Broadway, and how the intersections are some of the most unfriendly or dead spaces along the street are actually the opportunities for what could become some of the most important, comfortable, safe, fun places in the city. So there's streets like this in Hobart that you have to grab your friends to cross. You get tense You get your cortisol, your fear, climbs, and that really subconsciously almost prevents you from wanting to come back here or just wanting to shop downtown. And so those dangerous intersections need to be overcome. And this is on George Street in Sydney, which is also kind of, their Elizabeth Street. They turned it into a transit-only street, which is a possibility perhaps for Elizabeth Street. And then Queen Street in Auckland is their sort of spine going up from the waterfront in a similar way to Elizabeth Street. They're looking to turn that into a transit street, or they may have already. And a lot of these Australian cities and New Zealand cities are looking to be moved from being a livable city to a lovable city. And I think Hobart actually can do that, or is doing that, faster than any other city, but can go much further. Where cities that are already sort of well defined as the most livable are cities that people consume. And that livability rankings are done by The Economist magazine. And they're really geared towards sort of a sameness, a monoculture of cities that are trying to attract the different corporations that further perpetuate the sameness of cities. But our theory is that if you focus on trying to become a lovable city, one that attaches people that are already there, it invites new people to come contribute to give love to the city in ways that can build and grow the existing vision and identity of the city. We think building a lovable city actually achieves livability more inclusively, more quickly, more resourcefully. So we shape our public spaces thereafter they shape us. We don't realize the extent to which we are shaped by our spaces, how our culture, our health, our identity is shaped by our places, and but we don't actively shape our places. So placemaking is making this virtuous cycle of challenging and supporting us all to be co-creators of our spaces, because our spaces are co-creators of us. So it's people and places build each other up, but they also can hold each other back. So the other city in the world that's doing this, that we've learned a lot from and gotten to work in for 20 years, is Detroit. And I think Detroit's created a similar buzz that you started. It's not as livable a city as any, but it's attracting and drawing out the people that have lived there for a long time, and attracting new people to feel like they're creating their city, they're having an impact, in lots of little small ways, but powerful ways. So and their Woodward Avenue, which is the core of their downtown that goes down to the waterfront, instead of also a problematic sort of dead waterfront. It's a beautiful waterfront, but it's not reflecting the culture and soul and humanity that is apparent in your city, at your water's edge. We say great waterfronts reflect the face and identity of the city, and the fact that the incompleteness of yours is a huge opportunity to have a process of what is your economy, your culture, your identity today, and how do you have everyone in the city compete to contribute to what that is along the street, and then flow down to the water's edge, and small plazas reflect and showcase what that is. So but with Detroit, this is what it was like 100 years ago. They even had the center of the city. This was their center, and they even had little food trucks and events. It was one of the most lively cities in the country, if not the world. But then they made every big urban planning mistake possible. All the big boondoggles, the way they planned for cars and traffic, for economic development. They really extracted all the place value from that same place. And so we were brought in around 2000. They said they want to create a destination to go to, not through. They want congestion right at the center of their downtown with the major arterials. This was sort of the ground zero, the center of the city. So we did a vision for a square that attracted it was about $20 million to build. And within a few years after, it attracted over $1 billion of investment right around it, getting corporations from the suburbs to move downtown around the square. One of the companies was CompuWare, by a very successful developer, a billionaire that then actually hired us several years later to do a plan to activate the spaces around it and he did it within 3 months. So it wasn't a plan, it wasn't a master plan, it was actually just an action plan. It was all done through what we call lighter, quicker, cheaper projects. So this was the vision we developed, and it started with putting a beach right at the center of the city, and that actually was implemented the same month Detroit declared bankruptcy. And so this was what created the attachment and resilience for the city and reflected this types of small projects and very tactile experiences, human scale experiences that people were having in that city, and became the sort of force behind its revival. And so we'll talk about this idea of the power of 10, but it's at this scale, especially at the center of a city, that people connect, the sort of scale at which people can acknowledge each other and feel like you're in each other's presence, make eye contact. But the layering of uses, that's slower places like this that enable this place attachment and resilience. So it did lots of markets and gathering, all this sort of lighter, quicker, cheaper stuff that made it informal, not too fancy, very accessible, and started to incubate businesses that could then fill all the vacant retail that was in the city and so forth. So what is placemaking? So placemaking, we think, is a fraught term. It's challenging. It's meant, the most important part of it is debating what it means and who does it. But we think it's in a way, the biggest crisis in our world today is our lack of agency in how we shape our world. And we see place and placemaking is really challenging and supporting everyone to be co-creators of the world again, of their public realm, of our connection to place, to country, to each other, in all the virtuous cycles between them. And so everyone should have their own definition, and I frankly say something different every time someone asks me what I think it means. But it's a collaborative process by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize shared value. And then it's also strengthening the connection between people and the places they share, that virtuous cycle. I also want to add that we've been working with indigenous placemaking people in different parts of the world that say that, including a woman a Maori woman who says that we don't just need indigenous placemaking, we need all placemaking to be indigenous. And we see placemaking as kind of informalizing and often feminizing the process of shaping cities, and making it more of a process, which is key, more relational, more human-centered. This Maori woman was explaining that, meaning that, in a way, white culture and male culture is sort of really defining our cities, our public realms, and to make it more compatible with other more marginalized groups, we need to make it a little more informal, more human, more relational, more social, and so everyone can take that to mean what they like, but we can't just putting plaques and just acknowledging them is not enough. And just putting art, it's a start. It gets awareness, but how do we really make our cities more comfortable and open to other cultures? Because that's actually what we all need, and that's what's going to make cities better too. It's not just because it's the right thing to do, and so forth. So a little bit of history about the placemaking movement, and some of you may have heard of Jane Jacobs, William White. These were people that actually my father worked with, and I knew a little bit. My father organized the first Earth Day in 1970, so I grew up around a lot of the founders of the environmental movement. But he actually kind of left the environmental movement because it wasn't really about people and places and cities at that time. And we've always seen place and placemaking as a way to bring other causes to environmentalism and get new people involved in stewardship and sharing a deeper connection with their environment and their place. So we started calling the work that I joined Project for Public Spaces in the 90s, right about when PPS started using the word placemaking to describe the tools and processes that they had developed to apply the work of Jane Jacobs and William White. And the idea was to change, to help other people do this work around the world, and to turn upside down the shaping of cities, really to start with people and places, that common sense, make the placemaking process more accessible to everybody. We actually had, Helen, I mentioned, Gail is someone I've known my whole life, and we'd actually William White had developed a lot of the same tools in parallel to him, a different part, in the U.S. And so we did a lot of our work for the first decades was very similar to that work, doing observation user analysis. But then we saw placemaking as a way to sort of make everyone a Jan Gehl or a Holly White. Everyone had this expertise and helped them do the observations themselves, because through that you build capacity and relationships and drew out the expertise that's in a community. So it's very compatible and additive, I think, on the really wonderful planning work that Jan Gehl did here. But we started seeing sort of a movement emerging around placemaking. We started working in Eastern Europe a lot, and Latin America, and with different energies coming from different parts of the world. And in 2013, we really shifted our focus to building a movement and connecting the people innovating on what placemaking is from many parts of the world, with the goal to sort of decentralize and distribute the movement, so it's not defined by a central organization. And so in 2018, we sort of spun off from PPS to form Placemaking X, which is very small, but it's made up of now more than a couple dozen regional networks around the world. There's new ones in the Philippines and Nepal and Pakistan, and one in Africa, and the Arab countries have a network. European networks, the Latin American networks, very active, and so forth. And then Australians, there's more Australians interested in placemaking per capita than any other part of the world, and I've gotten to work here more than any other part of the world, actually. But there's not a formal network, which is kind of fine. It actually happens kind of informally. So I'm going to keep moving, but these are some of the conferences that have helped shape the movement that we've helped organize, and we're organizing our first global summit in Mexico City, the first week of November. Here's each of the regional networks you can read about on our website, and a link to their websites. But how do you apply this work? How do we actually get this to happen in Hobart? How do we build a campaign for placemaking here? How do we allow everybody to play some small role in this effort and celebrate what they're already doing, but leverage it and support it? And one way is this idea called the power of 10, where we say a great city needs at least 10 great public destinations. Each destination needs 10 places in it, and then each of those places needs 10 things to do in it. So, for Elizabeth Street to be a great street, it needs, some big public destinations actually on either end or along it, perhaps, but each block needs a place with 10 things to do in it. And so, the space right in front of here is one of those places, for sure. But then there's also some breaks in the block that either need to be sort of enhanced, or there needs to be you want to be able to see the next street corner is somewhere you want to be, to kind of keep the continuity and energy of a street. And to slow people down enough so they do shop and feel connected to the space and to other people in it. So we think great cities, can really quickly redefine themselves through a public destination, not through a big boondoggle project or a skyline changing. It's through a great waterfront place, not a huge place, a small one, or a great street, or a great square, or a great market. That cities can quickly, inexpensively, really reinvent how they're perceived and loved locally and understood globally. But for New York, as an example, it's not about copying a great place from somewhere else. If it's copying anything, it's copying more the process for how the community created it, and more the governance and management structures, which isn't as exciting and sexy, but it's actually what makes them work. And so with each of these stories, for example, it started because the community was actually against something, or against tearing down the High Line, or against developers on the waterfront. And they moved from being against it to being for it. So that's the hard thing, though, because often the only way the community's allowed to participate in shaping the public spaces is to oppose something. And that's an indicator that they care. So it's not all overall bad thing, but for them to have an impact, it's how they move to being for something that's important. So placemaking is a means of helping people articulate what they want and moving those tensions and embracing the tensions and debates to create something positive. And the way to get it grounded and constructive often is to say, well, how do we make these places work? And how do we leverage these projects to make them a catalyst for the places around them? And so a good park isn't just a pretty place. It's not just a green space, but it has places to go within it, small destinations. And then at the magic, though, it occurs at the human scale. And so that's where cities fail and succeed. And it's the layering of uses. There's something for children to do, or for older people, or for someone to work in the space, or can you get some coffee? If it's just one thing, you're spending too much money on one purpose, and it dissipates that energy. So we did this exercise in Melbourne, one of my first trips to Australia. We did the Power of 10, and they realized they were creating great urban design. It's a beautiful city, but they weren't creating places. There was no one's job to do that. And we had all the different departments there, and they hadn't really met each other. And they realized they all had key parts of placemaking skills and resources, but urban design alone had been doing such a good job. They were kind of blocking the other departments from being involved. So the tourism department corroborated that people were only spending half a day in the city because there are only 3 or 4 places to go: the markets, the laneways, the library, and Fed Square. And so they looked at the yellow dots, the opportunity places, as if you make those work too, then all of a sudden people will spend a full day or more and circulate throughout. So we think this focus brings about is moving from a project-led city to a place-led city. So project-led is let's just build the same facilities that every other city has, just efficiency, move traffic through, build the buildings. Discipline-led is let's build nicer buildings or nicer projects, more higher fancy architects and experts from outside and make it pretty. Place-sensitive is let's listen to people, let's be contextually sensitive, culturally, environmentally sensitive, but it's still experts or government pushing a solution through and, in listening, but doing it, it can be very progressive, but it's not necessarily creating great places as a goal, or rarely is, and it actually limits the capacity of the communities that are really needed to make places thrive. It's still the experts that are controlling it. So placemaking can happen in many different ways. This is a diagram developed by Dean Cracknell, placemaking education, who's here and lives in Launceston. He has a website that has incredible resources on placemaking, a lot of them free, and some affordable online placemaking training courses. But this shows how placemaking projects can be a whole campaign, from action-focused efforts to more planning and policy-focused, from community-led to council-led, and we need to do all of them. We can't just do sort of one-off things alone. And this shows how placemaking can move from on all scales, how a campaign can be what you do in front of your business, your block, your street, your waterfront, and how you build a campaign to create 10 great destinations in your city, how Tasmania becomes a state of great places and destinations and main streets, and in Australia, how it leads the world in place-led cities. So I'm just going to quickly go through a bunch of pictures. This is actually my father, sort of in his retirement right now, has been going through his pictures from around the world and writing blogs on something called the Social Life Project, on what if we turn upside down our cities to start with social life and people and places. And these are sort of the key ideas that he thinks are most important for cities to organize around. And there's a lot more on these on his website. But he says, first, bring back the public square. And I was learning that, I guess intentionally Australian cities didn't start with squares because they saw it as somehow threatening from political action or something like that. So Australian cities, I guess, need these public squares to be the place where you create your identity and culture. The squares can be small. They don't have to be big places, but they should be flexible and programmable, and evolving. They should have economic activity in them. They should have vendors and small businesses that create the edge, that add to social life. Actually, like we were at Wellington Walk, and it's a lovely little space. That and all these spaces need managers and programming. They need constantly evolving and have an integrated approach to safety and security and dealing with the people that are the range of people that are attracted to them and they should serve. This is a place called Gabriel's Wharf in South Bank, London, that created a destination in a very dead part of the waterfront by just creating these temporary buildings, like stage set buildings, that incubated small businesses, created lots of jobs, had an offer of retail spaces that didn't exist in the city otherwise, but created an incredible cultural destination on the waterfront that really led the transformation of the South Bank. And then not too far along on the South Bank, the other anchor is this the borough market. And so we talk about cities need to be market cities. They need a full spectrum of informal to formal vending and retail. So there needs to be informal vending to activate spaces, but they need to be supported to make sure they're adding to public space. And then people need ways to incubate their businesses to be in the various stages and from there. So good market districts have a lot of those spaces within them and integrate into cities in various ways. But then sidewalks are also markets. The best streets, some of my favorite streets are streets that are narrow like this, in like places like Paris, where they blur the public and private space on the sidewalk, but they work first and foremost because they're social places. The corners are social places where people are stopping and gathering, and people stroll on them, and this is where people are most proud of and connected to their city. So it's the public use and the private use, the ways the corners and intersections spill out into the street, so they become a shared space. So cars have to walk walk through the intersection basically. So the corners are these key places, and when cars turn off of a faster street into a neighborhood, they're really forced to go into to slow down into a shared space as well. So architecture needs to be less about design, less about buildings, more about people and life and product and business in the businesses, and it can be more open on the ground floor. The best streets, every building, every storefront, every pedestrian is competing to contribute to everyone else's shared experience. They all raise their behavior up to give back to the street. And you have that at different sections. And then you start to blur public and private space, and you start to, in places you get rid of regulations to test, different ways of doing things, and you build trust of, everyone, that everyone's going to give to the space and respect each other and not encroach on each other's spaces inappropriately. So the best public spaces in the world are actually self-managed, self-governed, and where everyone sort of knows how to behave in the space. But this blurring of public-private spaces in a city that also has cold, bad weather, as is Paris, are possible. So this is back in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. A building right on my corner, owned by a Yemeni family, has the best businesses because they're very small spaces and more affordable rents. And but during the pandemic, the building just really came alive and spilled out into the street. There's a Spanish paella place, and we had 12,000 restaurants, dining decks in New York that helped save the restaurant industry during the pandemic. But a lot of the new buildings, unfortunately, kill the sidewalks. This is just down the street, and no one ever is stopped talking to each other in front of the street. But if you go to the other building, you'll always see somebody to talk to, or people slow down talking to each other. So public buildings also need to turn themselves inside out, whether it's a library, a school, university, a government building. This is Paris' City Hall, Federation Square here, of course, the library on the waterfront in Paris, and amenities also. So like bollards are an example of amenities that actually can support social life and triangulate, give people an excuse to stop and talk to each other on a corner. Great seating offers a range of different ways to sit on it and be comfortable, allow different groups to be next to each other. This is a bench that has all kinds of different people on the same bench connecting with each other in different ways. And then we talked about waterfronts, but also water. It's actually really cool that you can touch the water down here at the base. But you need water features also, and to celebrate your beautiful water here, your clean water. The city was founded in a place that had good access to water. So celebrate that. And I've heard people talk about the water river that goes under the city. It's exciting. And then in other ways, through art and other cultural assets to draw those out further. But art that people connect to, art that draws out people's personality. The best places draw out the quirky personalities that are there. There's a lot of quirky people in this city, which is great. Where do you want to see that? You want to be in places where people are open and vulnerable and relaxed, and comfortable, where kids can play, not on play equipment, but on something that's not always exactly meant for play, and so. And obviously we need to make cities welcoming and comfortable for the most vulnerable populations, because that makes it work for everybody else. And for the elderly, this should be a place where you can continue to live and be connected socially and walk in when you can't drive anymore or you can't go very far. And lastly, it should be about joy and connection and especially for men, there's a lot of studies, so older men particularly need social connection and relationships. They don't walk unless they have a place to walk to. So where are the places that they can hang out and not feel like they're loitering, but actually feel like they're adding to the community. The Italians have a great culture of passeggiata, strolling, so I could see a culture where most people want to walk down Elizabeth Street or walk down the waterfront every day and bump into their friends. It's something that's created. And lastly, just make it fun. So affection, connection is a sign of success. So how do you create the places where people would be affectionate with each other, where they talk to somebody they never met, they connect deeper with someone they're with? Those are the indicators that you're of a success, but those are the outcomes you're trying to plan for. So I will leave it there, but I think placemaking in Hobart together can have a real global impact. You can take this further than almost any city I can think of. You are taking it further in a lot of small ways, but the energy of Hobart to prevent your city from changing in any ways you're scared of, the best way is to proactively build the vision for your public realm, showcase it there, attract people and investment on your terms, but then the culture is preserved and created in the public spaces, in the markets and the streets, and you have an amazing culture here. You're so lucky. The connection to food and place and country, the people that are here, the history that's here, but also the people you're welcoming here and integrating is really special and spectacular. And the stronger you get as a place, the more you can do that in ways that everyone adds to it, competes to contribute to the shared experience of everybody else. And the ideas, the culture, the people that can be incubated in a city like this can have a huge impact globally.
Well, without further ado, I'm going to call our beautiful panelists up to the stage. So I'll go introduce them one by one. So firstly, in no particular order, actually, but it is alphabetical. Apurva Bora. So Apurva is an urban planner known for advocating the perspectives of young professionals in the built environment sector. Having experienced the contrasting urban landscapes of India, Sydney, and now Hobart, Apurva brings a unique and fresh perspective to the panel. With a background in the planning and development industry in Pune, in India, she was attracted to the growing but stable nature of Australian cities, and 6 years ago made the move to Sydney to pursue her master's, where she delved into the fields of public transport and placemaking. So, you can see that she's very connected to this. Seeking a lower density and strong sense of community, which Hobart has in spades, she settled in Hobart 2 years ago, drawn to its beauty, growth prospects, and friendly atmosphere. As the current convener of Tasmanian Young Planners at the Planning Institute of Australia, she enjoys assisting and representing fellow young planners analysing and evolving behavioural patterns and trends among the young generations in context of cities. She has a keen interest in understanding the symbiotic relationship between transport community and the youth's connection to the city, and Apurva, she definitely looks forward to being one of those key people to be part of the shaping of Tasmania into the future, whilst preserving its local charm and natural beauty and heritage. Please welcome her to the stage. So, next let's introduce Dean, who's already been mentioned in the beautiful presentation by Ethan. So, Dean Cracknell is a co-founder and executive director of the Town Teams movement, placemaking enabler, urbanist curator of the placemaking education platform, which was also mentioned. So for those that don't know, Town Teams movement started in Perth in WA and has since grown from strength to strength and is now found in many other states in the mainland and is growing every day. He inspires, guides and trains people to be placemakers and positive change makers. He's also a passionate champion for main streets and town centres. He is one of the 100 global placemaking ex-people, and Town Teams movement is a non-profit social enterprise building a movement of positive doers. He enables local communities and governments to connect, organise and act to regenerate the fabric of their neighbourhoods and to create better places. So, and you can also go to the website and check it all out because there's great resources there. Please, Dean, come to the stage. Last but not least, Jacquie Allen, who's very kindly also volunteered her time this evening instead of being, somewhere else on a Friday evening. As Director of Connected Cities of the City of Hobart, Jackie's responsibilities include community programs, economic development, smart city, environmental health, creative city, welcome pad, city projects with an emphasis on strategy and programs that bring together three pillars of economy, social and environmental activity. So you can see it's a very important portfolio. Starting her working life in performing arts management, Jacquie draws on this background alongside extensive experience in the public sectors in Western Australia and Tasmania. She has worked on a range of cultural infrastructure projects that have contributed to urban renewal, including the development in Hobart, the Perth Cultural Centre and the State Theatre Centre in Western Australia. Immediately prior to commencing with the city, Jacquie was responsible for delivering economic stimulus support to the cultural and creative industries, events and tourism and hospitality sectors during COVID-19 as Deputy Secretary at the Tasmanian Department of State Growth. So I hope you all spent your tourism vouchers. A passionate advocate for the importance of effective public sector organisations, Jacquie is recognised nationally as a practitioner in public value strategy, development and delivery. Please come and welcome her. So, I'll probably just ask one or two quick questions just to warm up. There's probably great questions that you're thinking of. I think I'm doing a bit of feedback. And then whenever we go through those couple of initial questions, if you can please come up, I'll put the mic there on the stage. And I know it's a bit daunting, in particular because the lights are very bright, but we would love to hear, your questions and your thoughts and your comments as well. So just a first initial thought, can you please each one just share a quirky, memorable, lovable place that just sticks in your mind?
Tough question to begin with. I am very inspired by Ethan and many other placemakers around Australia and the world. But I think everyone in this audience can be a placemaker as well. So for me, the most inspiring things are the actions done by local people, whether that's a seat outside my house like I've got, or a planting your verge garden, or some chalk on the footpath, playing with your kids. For me, the most inspiring things are actions done by local people, and if you want any advice on that, we do that for free. That's our purpose as an organisation. So I think I want to see more locally led action, and I believe you can all do it far better than what I can.
Ooh.
Yeah. I moved to Tassie 2 years ago, and just after I moved, there was Showcase Moona that happened at the time, and I thought that was really some of the activities in that place-making area was like to get all the multicultural people together and having their languages written all over. Like there was this particular laneway activation thing where you had to write your numbers in your language, and I felt that was really engaging because you can still be yourself in this country where you're getting accepted for what you are, but also everyone's living together and doing something together. So I thought that was quite quirky and very interestingly engaging. So you're right, like it's more people that actually do more, like bring life to that area than, yeah. But it's a collaborative thing, but yeah.
I've been struggling to think of a favourite quirky place that doesn't involve food, but I've got there. So back in Perth in Western Australia, there is this place that's called the Blue Room Theatre. And many years ago, when it was developed by the guy who I'm now married to, but I didn't know that at the time, it came about because essentially they were running this building that was owned by government. It had been a former school. It wasn't useful to anyone, so it was given to an arts organisation called the Actors Centre, and they turned this space into a little 60-seat theatre. And they had been receiving funding from state government, but for some reason they forgot to put their application in. And so came up with this vision for the space and achieved funding through the Australia Council for it to become an experimental venue for artists. And the philosophy was that people could come in, they'd get given $2,000, I think, to do a show. And the weirder the show was, the better. I, at the time, was working in another room in the building that was the office next door. So I used to get quite a bit of exposure to this weird stuff. And it was a great building it was chaotically run. My husband is still quite chaotic in the way that he runs things, and it was a really cool space. And then years later, when I was working in capital works at the department, I oversaw an upgrade of the venue, which we made it DDA compliant, and we put in a lift, and we did all kinds of things like that. And Tony's never really wanted to talk to me properly about that space afterwards. But I guess my point is it was it was a space that no one else wanted. It was used in a way that was almost ruleless. I think with everything I know about public buildings now, I would have been a bit terrified if I was responsible for it. But really fantastic things happened there, and people got an opportunity to try things out in a low-risk environment. And yeah, I think it was, and hopefully still is, a cool place in Perth.
Just quickly, you guys got an idea for some of my favorite places, but whenever I go to a new city, I try to go to the public market, the farmers market, as the way to connect with the social life of that city, to see how people are connected to each other, how they're connected to the rural areas, the country, and the way that they're innovative in a sense too, the culture they've created with food. And honestly, I remember when I came here in December 2019, the farmers market here was one of the most lovely spaces, and how people were connecting with each other, from people from all over the world, but people that clearly love this place are forming or have formed deep roots here. So you have something really special, and and how do you show that and showcase that on a more regular basis, and create places like that, throughout the Central Business District.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to open up to the floor. Is anyone brave enough to be the first? Either come up here or you can try to shout.
I was just wondering how hard it is to get the synergy between, we're obviously talking about creatives, and this is, per capita, Tasmania is probably one of the most creative places in Australia. How do you get the synergy behind the creativity and also then the planning of the space? And do you think we need to relax our kind of like, I don't know, structure when it comes to hospitality and those kind of venues to make things more easily integrated and acceptable?
Yes.
All right, I'll expand on that. I think, look, it's interesting. Again, coming from WA, and Dean, I don't know what your experience was. Like, I loved coming to Hobart, and I used to love going to Melbourne when I went to a bathroom in a hospitality venue. That there is no way the Perth planning laws would allow you to construct like that. And I guess that this is the challenge around how we need all those kind of spaces. So if we look at, say, creativity in relation to the performing arts, we need those blue room kind of spaces. They're where people get to experiment and have a chance without risk. And the thing I forgot to say about the blue room is it was incredibly grungy and awful, but some quite well-known people got their start there. So people like Rove McManus, probably showing my age a bit there, people like Tim Minchin, while they were at university, got to come and experiment and have their, learn what they were doing. We do also need the kind of designed and more managed spaces. It's a real challenge though, because one of my other portfolio responsibilities is environmental health. And so all the legislation that we have around keeping people safe and not poisoning them and doing all that kind of stuff. But we can be a bit more flexible about how we do that and the way we design it. In my experience in Hobart, it's actually quite flexible compared to other places. Again, there are places where you walk through the kitchen to go to the toilet. You don't do that in many other places that I've seen. But you must have something to say about this.
So we see placemaking is doing, not planning, and it's getting many small actions, and it's true. Government isn't really set up to do that, and planning processes aren't set to do that. The tools of planning actually don't often have a lot to do with placemaking or good placemaking. So we see it as really turning upside down the process of shaping cities to start with people and places, and then you figure out what regulations and processes you need to give structure where needed. But often, increasingly in placemaking processes, it's about just trying things, doing temporary activations of spaces, using that as engagement, talking about it, building, and through that you build the capacity of people to work together, to learn, to make mistakes, to shift the culture from one of fear of doing things differently, to one of, hey, let's learn together, let's figure out what resources and skills are here, and so things start to be lots of smaller, cheaper things. But collectively, you realize you all have a lot of capacity to do this, and you create this learning process where you all develop a lot more capacity. And so I've gotten to work with a lot of the capital cities, around Australia, and a lot of them have this challenge where they're moving towards there's placemaking people in government now, which is great, and they're doing a great job. That you have some of the highest quality people in government of any country I've worked. But what's needed next is to move towards an enabling model, and because to great places require more skills than any one discipline can offer, but also need to be multi-created from every sector, and especially have that grassroots energy. There's a balance though, so it's always whoever's leading the placemaking process we celebrate, and we say, okay, for you to succeed and have more demand for your skills and services, we need to get the other sectors involved and other people. So it's people are always, someone's blocking, but then we try to diversify it. And that's what, I think we can go further into different examples of what else some Australian cities are doing. But what Town Teams is doing is with these Town Teams is really coming at it from the part of the main street of the governance that's missing, is organizing the community-based people to be a partner, to create demand for, to inform, often a much more formal top-down planning process.
Do you have something to add, Apu?
Not really, but I don't want to be negative in this course, but we've, as young planners, you, like a lot of you must have known, we've done some parking days in the past, and I wasn't involved in many of those, but the narrative I've heard was that it was quite difficult in terms of implementing, in terms of getting the traffic plan and public liability insurance and those kind of things. So I'm still a bit, I'll say I have a balanced perspective, because I do want it to be a bit more flexible, but there's also the safety aspect to it. And having done similar projects back in India, it was quite risky. I'll say nothing happened, but it was quite risky. So I'm actually, when I came to Australia, it was quite good that we have these measures in place. But you're right, like having more pilot projects and encouraging and having more support is definitely, important. Yeah.
And where she's from in India, in Pune, we had a conference, our first placemaking week India, actually. Really strong network there. And the federal government in India is actually running what they call placemaking marathons, where they do 72-hour long experiments in I think 75 cities they've done this in. Transforming street spaces with paint and activation.
Yes.
So so even in a big top-down government, they're doing this.
Yeah, and I feel like we've got in India, because we've got so many people and everything, there's more competitions and those kind of pilot projects that are more from the people rather than like organized by the government. There's a lot of other organizations that do it, but I feel again that safety component comes in, and in that way it's quite good here that we care about safety, but yes, like we do need a bit of flexibility as well. Yes.
Sorry. Am I talking
I've not. I can stand up here. I know it's quite daunting.
Yes, it is. Oh, geez. So in your presentation, you spoke a lot about main strips in big cities, but you also mentioned that Hobart is a city you go through, not to. And so I was wondering, the difference being is we all know we have traffic issues and discussion points. Would it make more sense for us then to do these little micro interactions or whatever outside of the city? Would that be a good place for us to start as a city rather than on our waterfront, as an example?
Yeah, great question. So it's a yes and kind of answer. I think it is place. You need to have the core of your community, the core of your state. Have a strong destination or a series of destinations within it to make it all work. So we really do think you need to start in the waterfront and the core and the spine of the city, a street like this, to really make them work, because this is where your culture and your economy is defined, and yes, and they need a full spectrum of spaces throughout the neighborhoods, and every neighborhood should have a gathering place, and neighborhoods, just like you need a full spectrum of private to public space, you need your own private home, a neighborhood needs a place where it gathers and connects, and different cultures need their places where they can gather and connect. And even within a street, you have the back of a store and the front of a store, and it starts to blur from private to more public. But I do think you can build your capacity and your energy and test ideas in neighborhoods and in places like this that are more fringe in different ways. But ultimately, you want to showcase the best of everything as much as you can in the centers of your city, and get everyone from the whole island to compete to contribute to what it is this area is about, and how do we be part of it, at your core, at your center.
If you don't mind me interjecting, Dean, in your experience with all of the different town teams that have been, formed, and what has galvanized or removed some of the businesses, communities in some of the smaller centres, because there are town teams that are far from the big, big cities as well.
Yeah, so we typically work in locations that aren't major city centres, because those locations are more connected to and loved by local people. So I agree. We need to be doing this everywhere, and we need action on all levels, in all levels of society and environment to do things. But the trick is creativity. So one of the most creative, quirky, crazy ideas I heard was an invisible zoo. It was in a country town in Western Australia, and they said, well, look, there's 3 of us here who want to do something cool in our place, and we've got no money, we've got no permission, we don't have a connection, we're going to create an invisible zoo. So they did an Instagram and social media and said, come down on Saturday morning, bring the kids and the family, because we've got an invisible zoo in town. So I was like, what the, so this is a very creative human process, and I think it taps into what you're passionate about. So find a way to connect your passion in a public space, ideally with other people, but be quirky, be creative, give it a go. And that, the waterfront has so many opportunities for simple, crazy little things like that can be done by us as humans, as citizens, that don't need lots of money or budget or approvals, and that's a good place to start. And starting small, building momentum is the best way to go. And check out the Invisible Zoo. It's cool. It could be. It could be.
So I had a little question leading on from that. So all of this granular stuff that happens, when Ethan was talking, I was really interested in the business model and the governance models of when it's, this safe to fail project at the start, and then something happens, and then how does the local government respond in a progressive way and let it grow? And I've seen it time and time again that it gets stifled at that point, and then it doesn't happen. And so we need to get responsive. The experts need to kind of meet the people on the ground in a way. But interested in your business models, examples from around the world.
No, I think that's a really interesting insight, that there's sort of a gap between the sort of grassroots energy, the tactical stuff, and then the more top down. And I think that probably reflected in the civic infrastructure, the sort of civic ecosystem. And so we look at you want to look holistically, just like you look holistically, the type of places, the type of actors, and how that network of actors in a city collaborate. So you all are part of that network. We have to find the ways to bridge, to find the other people that are missing from this room. We have to find the ways to bridge, the trust. We need to create the tools. We need to identify what's preventing, someone from moving from being part of a planning process, or from doing things, for what's preventing the little good small things from becoming supported or sustained for a longer period of time. I think there's a real openness right now, and I had a wonderful conversation with the councillors yesterday. And you're so lucky to have a city where you guys are all very close together and very connected, and all trying to figure this out together. And it's the process that's so of figuring that out together, the learning process, that's going to lead to so much great things, and increased capacity, and you're going to run into debates and bad ideas and mistakes along the way, and those are going to make you even better. They're going to cause the tensions, the failures are going to say, okay, if you keep it in this sort of learning community space, it's all about how do we keep supporting and drawing out and building, and yes, and every action that everyone's part of. So it's about building that learning community, and then we want to help you, connect that globally. So if you're trying to do something, or you're running into a challenge globally, we can help you find someone in another part of Australia or another part of the world that has overcome that challenge, or that can help inspire you to go further. But it really does come down to people. It's about empowering specific people. We're focused on that globally, connecting the leaders that are learning about placemaking but they're all connected to and grounded in networks locally. And so you all are a major incubator and nurturer of some of the best placemaking potential in the world, and how you each empower each other and enable everyone to do placemaking, find out what they're great at and what they can, and help them unleash that talent in the public realm. That's what this is about.
Can I add something? Yeah. And adding on to that, it's really important to have that knowledge sharing amongst the generations as well, because I feel the longer residents of the particular place, and then also the newer generation who's just like born and raised there, but also people who are new to the city, and there's just so many different perspectives that come in. So when someone's floating that idea there, instead of just knocking it down, there should be that conversation happening if that is actually possible, or something similar has happened and this one particular thing failed. So, like just make sure that you don't do that instead of saying don't do the entire idea. And I feel that conversation has started here, and the momentum needs to keep going because the young planners are also getting very active, and there are other, like we've got other design students as well in our Hobart and city of Hobart, and I feel like that's really important to have the younger population learning from the more experienced ones, because there's that mix of ideas happening. And yeah, I'm really hopeful, and I want to keep that thing. Yeah, I want to see that thing going. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. I mean,
Dialogue, sorry, because much of the public infrastructure, like the community infrastructure, was developed by communities in the 70s. And then something's happened over time where things have become so institutionalised and bureaucratised, but it was originally community infrastructure. And I think we're kind of on a circle back, and we have to really reflect on that. And in fact, to me, it is a creative, interesting, relational, tactical journey that we have to go on. Otherwise, we're going to go nowhere. And this is happening in Australia. It's not happening. There's lots of, it stops. And I've experienced that because I've been working on the grassroots projects for 15 years. And you get to that level, and then there's jobs in placemaking, yes. There's institutionalised, but it's not translating back. There's not like a systems approach or something.
Have something to do with the index that organisations or governments are making their decisions on. Like we talk about social, economic, or environmental. With the social index, is that building in place-led decision making or people-led decision making, lovability decision making? Is the answer, or some of the answer about embedding that into decision making in organisations like the council?
Wow, as the only government person on this panel, I'm going to have a crack at that one and be, I don't think particularly controversial, but I do think that we need to start coming up with different ways of measuring and expressing the value and things that are valuable. So for so long, we assess value economically and in financial terms, because that's something that's easy to quantify and easy to measure. And again, without going down any particular kind of political rabbit holes, that is often the dominant narrative in our community. We talk about kind of the financial, and we don't yet have ways for capturing that kind of meaning of social connection, of community value. And we tried to proxy economic impact studies in relation to that as well. And I having worked in government for a long time in culture and arts, which is absolutely like you walk into a room in Treasury and, there's assumptions about you being a numerate in the first place. So this is something I've grappled with for a really, really long time. Like in public policy and in public decision making, how do we elevate that discussion beyond the monetary? And that's not necessarily a problem just in bureaucracies or governments. It's actually about the community as a whole, and people being more vocal about the things that are important and valuable in the community, and pushing people to move the narrative beyond the economic and the financial. And look, those things are not unimportant, like people still have to be paid. But we need to have a different conversation around what's important and what's valuable, and what our communities want and how we provide that, I think.
So I love this question, this topic. In some ways, I initially, when I was starting out my career, I wanted to measure everything, and I thought if we just measured things better, we would we'd solve all the, internalize all the externalities and all that. But then I realized some of that measurement effort is sort of taking the life out of it. And really what we need is, it's unfolding, it's optimizing. Placemaking is about a story process that you don't know quite where you're going to end up with, and you're going to end up with something, the best places are these incredible transformations that are not a linear input-output predictable. If we were trying to measure it, we never would have gotten there. But also, there's some amazing work being done on this in Australia, and I heard recently that nationally you're looking at a well-being index, and there's gross national happiness in other places and stuff like that. And there's people we work with on happy cities that are measuring happiness in public spaces and all that. But the work I've been involved with most closely is on place capital. And I worked for a long time with the CEO of Adelaide, and he was the CEO of Port Phillip, and Darabin, Peter Smith, and he's actually the board chair of Placemaking X. And we developed together these metrics for place capital, saying that he wanted every department to sort of throw out their narrow metrics of just safety for police department, or just cleanliness or just tourism, or to look at. They're all trying to create shared value of the public realm, and they're all trying to create place attachment. And they actually developed KPIs, measurements for all of these, and with the idea first that it would cause people to collaborate better and realize they're all on together rather than sort of competing and working for narrow, sometimes disparate goals that actually sometimes actually degrade place if you're focused just on narrow safety outcomes or narrow, the way policing occurs in that way. It's not necessarily helpful for place. It's just, that's one of a dozen examples. But he says then the goal is actually, once you measure things holistically, then you actually are trying to move towards an enabling culture of building the capacity of communities to co-deliver and create places with you, and you actually devolve power to communities to sort of do this themselves. And so a lot of our work with placemaking, I said, we used to do a lot of measuring of data collecting, and we were the experts trying to be place sensitive and get all the data of how people were behaving, and now it's actually just helping people measure it themselves and do it much more qualitatively. They can do it quantitatively if they want, and we need more of that. But the qualitative stuff are what lead to the really good conversations and the debates and the realization of the deeper expertise, and that feelings matter too. That like how people feel about their place, even if they're quantitatively wrong, sometimes it still matters. It's a real issue, and it means they care. And so those are left out of a lot of data-driven processes. So I think it's yes and again. We want to do all of this, but it's if we just focusing on measurement, we're going to suck the life out of this, and we're not going to be focused on action and enabling culture that actually is needed to achieve our bigger goals. We're not addressing. We understand the problems. We don't need a lot more data to understand that we have a lot of crises. It'd be good to understand them in a more nuanced way. And we know a lot of the solutions out there, but it's the systems and our capacity to work together to apply these solutions and address our problems. That's the limiting factor. And so it's the governance models and things, like town teams and what this guy Peter Smith is developing. That's where the leading edge of change is. That is actually about turning upside down the way we all work together to start with places, but then build up new systems that enable us to address our bigger challenges.
I want to maybe just follow on with that comment, and as a qualitative researcher, I really welcome those comments. But I wanted to know how placemaking can meaningfully and sustainably, operate on an inclusivity model, because the creative class literature has shown that placemaking exercises and revitalising exercises tend to displace more vulnerable populations, right? And we've got this idea that this placemaking has to operate within an organic, ad hoc, community-driven way. So how can we do that? And I was wondering whether there's any value in thinking with the two often oppositional thoughts of placemaking and place-based intervention work, where that usually responds to areas of disadvantage, to try and alleviate entrenched disadvantage, and how they can be combined in maybe a more planned way, that without stymieing the creative efforts in the place-making endeavours as well. Because the last thing we want to see is people being made more vulnerable by these sorts of processes.
So no, I'm really glad you brought that up because it's a really important topic, and yeah, I mean, I probably can't cover all of that, but the you know, first of all, placemaking has from the start been about inclusion in a public space, but I think a blind spot of it has been housing affordability and the potential for that displacement. And it's it's a really complex issue, and in some it's playing out in totally different ways and very unpredictable ways in a lot of communities. Sometimes it's actually really helping the poorest people, and sometimes it's helping them for a while, but then all of a sudden it's not. And so it's really hard to predict some of the impacts, and and yes, we need to be a lot more aware of that. I do think there's cultural gentrification, there's economic gentrification. And placemaking can be and should be a really powerful tool to prevent cultural gentrification if it's highlighting, supporting the existing population, and attracting new people, whether it's tourists or new people moving into it. If they do move in, they respect and conform to that culture, and they become more conscious of how they may be affecting the existing population. And we need lower income, more informal life cultures, and more just different cultures in our places. So we need places to invite that in, and good public spaces that have a strong identity are more secure to allow that to happen, and people blend and feel more welcome, and so placemaking is key to inclusion. It's first and foremost an inclusion strategy. But yes, if there's not affordable housing available, if there's not access to jobs, access to be part of the community in deeper ways, then those are also things we need to be looking at. So placemaking can be ignorant to some of those, or oblivious to some of that at various stages. But so we're actually starting to work. Actually, we're organizing a conference at the Federal Reserve in New York in December on people working on place-based strategies to alleviate poverty in some of the lowest income neighborhoods in the U.S. Because more and more data shows that the biggest predictor of health outcomes, your economic outcomes is your zip code. So place predicts outcomes. So therefore, we need to actually change places. And, there's a woman, Majora Carter, is a good friend in the Bronx, that says you shouldn't have to leave your neighborhood to live in a better one. And she's actually very unpopular in her neighborhood because people think she's gentrified it, and she's trying to bring nice things to her neighborhood. And we were just up there with her, and she made a cafe, a nice cafe, that is all about the local culture and but there's neighbors that say, "Oh, you're making it too fancy," so it's fraught even within these communities. But placemaking is a way to have those discussions, to include other people in them, to allow the tensions to hold those tensions, and learn as you grow.
We're actually officially over time, but there was a couple of people that put up their hands. If people have a moment and they still want to ask the question, and then there's a conversation afterwards.
Great chocolate tart, lovely food, thank you. I was really interested in the panel expanding on an idea that Ethan raised about taking a development that people might be really against and leveraging that for some interesting opportunities, maybe like a stadium or something.
Nicely put.
I can have a crack. And look, it's not my part of council, but I guess one of the things that we are doing at the moment is doing some work on the northeast. Are we calling it a neighbourhood or a structure plan, Jaime? I'm getting confused.
In the northeast neighbourhood.
That's the one. And basically that is looking at the area around the site the stadium might be. And again, I'm probably straying into Jaime's turf here, so someone or Neil up the back, you can chip in. But essentially what we're trying to do is have a conversation with the community about what their aspirations are for that part of town. Now, the stadium is actually a Macquarie Point development piece of land, and that will be progressed through that. But we can have a conversation about, with a stadium, without a stadium, what's the community's aspirations for those kind of spaces? And what do we want the city to be, and what kind of experiences do we want to have? So I think yeah, it is an opportunity to get people to talk about what they do want, and use that to influence, what proposals people are trying to put forward. I'm going to back up the track though there. Don't stop talking about the stadium now though, because City of Hobart does not have an official position one way or the other in relation to the stadium, but we do welcome the conversation around what people want the city to be and look like and what the experience can be.
Very, very well put. And this is a conversation, may I add, that's better had after the official recording.
Thank you. I will be a critical thinker. Just come back to the conversation where the 10 points of every city. Put it in context what Hobart or Tasmania have. I love Tasmania, moving here 4 years ago. I live in Australia for 17 years. But the lack of place making in Tasmania, in a specific Hobart, for a growing city, in particular young people, they don't have that place making and a place to call youth safe or environment safe for that particular new generation, including my kids, where I have to be in a waiting list for a swimming class for 2 years. And we call in a place making to do better cities when we don't have our own citizens or our own place making to call our own city. You make a very good point when you say coming in and coming out of the city. The majority of the people in Tasmania or Hobart is coming from 15 minutes, 20 kilometers away, and is considered regional, rural areas. So the majority of the people not coming to enjoy places or making places in the CBD. The majority of that people is tourists. Not too many Hobart people coming to go to Macquarie Point or just something like that, unless you have a visitor from interstate and you want to go be as a tourist. So how we integrated the 10 points or the 10 visit areas for our own community, not attracting the external, talking about COVID, no need to come and know here, we need to have our own economy and our own place making for our own citizens in Hobart.
It's really beautifully put, and it's a really good point that we sort of haven't discussed as much. The tourism angle, certainly placemaking, it really should always be about providing for and making the place comfortable for locals first, and for people that live here and new immigrants, and honestly, that's what I think is attractive about Hobart and will continue to be, is that people come here because they want to know what locals love about it, and they want to connect to that and they want to feel like a local. You want tourists to feel and act like locals in a sense. They'll have a better experience, and they'll spend their time and money in ways that add to the place. They'll behave better. But one with the power of 10, one exercise you do is that you want each place. You want to think of all the different user groups you're trying to accommodate and help make feel comfortable in the place. So you want a place. So every place should have something for children and something for youth, for teenagers that are often left out and designed out of a city, and something for elderly should be comfortable there, and women and handicapped people and so forth, and people of different orientations, and so how always checking, is this if it's comfortable to the more vulnerable, marginalized populations, it's going to work better for everybody else. So that power of 10, you look at the layers of how we're going to get families to want to move, to really walk and move through the whole space, and whatever demographic you're trying to achieve, and I think that's the future of tourism, is that people are going to go to places that have a really strong sense of place. People can travel where they like more than ever. They can move where they like. They can invest where they like. It's the places that people love the most, where people are frankly giving the most love to the place, will be the ones that succeed most in the future. And they will attract more people to give more love to that place, including tourists. And you have to give, so placemaking is about giving lots of people lots of ways to love a place constructively. And that you have that potential. You have the incompleteness, the energy that's here, the culture, the groundedness. You have the potential to create one of the most loved places on the planet, and that will, accordingly give a lot of love back to the planet. It'll show what human civilization is capable of, and create a model and create new ideas and that are replicable, from governance to food culture to whatever. You need a place to enable great ideas, great civilization to emerge from. The mixing of all the people that are in this room and it's just a magical group of talent and ideas that you all are lucky to have and share this place together with. So,
thank you.
I'll stop there.
No, I was just saying thank you because you exactly pointed out the things, and specifically in Hobart, I felt because I came from the mainland and came from another Indian city, and it was just amazing how the community feel I felt was very strong here. And even having tourists, you can obviously easily spot tourists and locals, but in Tassie specifically, I felt the neighborhood markets that neighborhood markets here that you have in different suburbs. I felt there was a more local and community connection over there, and people are sitting around and enjoying, and there are kids-friendly spaces. But when you come to the tourist spots, and the other day I was talking to my colleagues I never go to Salamanca, it's a very touristy place. It's not for locals anymore for the market side of things, but they prefer to go to the local market. So I felt having that connection to your own suburb, and you see the people and having those spaces. When I came new, I felt immediately connected to Hobart because of that community, and it was immediately they had taken me in. I felt like that and you start talking about the place and the connection to the place, so the history. And so I live in Kingston Beach, and people immediately they spotted I'm new in town, and Kingston Beach was like this, and they shared the history. And I feel like that culture and history is so important for that connection, but you need to have it conveyed for the people who are coming in. And like you said in a couple of questions before, that culture and history is what connects the new person in town, and that's what makes it unique. Because a lot of my friends who chose to move back to mainland, they're I want to go back to Sydney or Melbourne, and there's so many things that are not there here. And I was just sad to see that they couldn't see so many things that were there here and not there back in mainland city, and I don't want this to become another mainland city. So it was just that culture and connection to the people in the suburb. And you said about the place that local places were more important, and when you come to the city, you sort of communicate to someone else from another suburb, where do you live? And so I feel it's really beautiful in Hobart, and we need more spaces that can just have those conversations, because people here, I love that they just have a conversation with a stranger, and that's just beautiful about Hobart. That's what I felt. And this doesn't happen that often in another country. So I feel like just having spaces and people coming in, people are already ready for those spaces. Yeah.
I think we'll leave it there. In particular, sorry.
Actually, I have something I want to say.
Yes.
It'll be very quick. We are on Moina land, but they're not here. They're not here. It's all very well to say, we stand on this land, but we don't. Where are they? Where is their spirit? Where is their culture? Where is their sense of who they are? We name the mountain because it's got a lovely lyrical name. We might name the town. We might even name the whole state. But the indigenous history and culture of this place is just nowhere here. And so that's what I have to say. I mean, are we going to just keep on making these gestures, this kind of virtue signaling about, I want to recognise that we're actually on Aboriginal land? Well, we are on Aboriginal land, and we need to recognise that A, we're on Aboriginal land, and B, they're not here. They're part of the future. They're part of the future, exactly right. And I would like to see in placemaking that there is a recognition that placemaking involves the past as well as the future, and that this is the future. This is the difficult past that we have to engage with and somehow find a way of building into our community. That is what I wanted to say. You don't have to answer.
Beautifully said.
Anyone wanted to respond to that very deep thought?
I think a few of the questions have led me to say what I'm about to say. I think placemaking can be perceived as being done to you or for you. And I think it's really important that placemaking is done with the community or ideally by the community. And what I'm really passionate about is helping local governments and communities to see you're much stronger working together. And don't think that Ethan is going to come from New York and solve Hobart's problems, or me from Launceston going to come and solve your problems. It's the change that we want to create ourselves and making that happen rather than expecting the city to do everything, expecting experts. You are so knowledgeable about the place, and you can create the change that you want to see in your local area. And sometimes it's just smiling at a person, saying hello. Tasmanians are incredibly friendly, and even if you do that, that's an important action for creating a better place. So don't just think of this as an expert thing and professionals doing it for you or to you. It's about what we create together, particularly when we work as a team.
Okay, I think that will wrap it up for tonight.